Hi everyone, this is Pranav Narang. Welcome to another episode of Alma Diaries. Today we have with us Sabarish Suresh, who is JGLS 2018 graduate, and he has completed his LLM from Cardozo School of Law in Comparative Law, and recently started because he's right now pursuing his GSD. Am I right?
Yeah,
From
that's correct.
Cardozo School of Law. Yeah. So can you give a brief overview of your research interest or profile? How?
Sure. So what I do is to read the law through a psychoanalytic method. I use psychoanalysis as a critical and methodological tool to read the trauma of the law, what the law represses, what in the genre is called as a juridical unconscious. So predominantly I focus on the Constitution of India and how the violence and trauma of the partition affected the making of the constitution and continues to affect it in repeating the discourse over and again. So my thesis is on excavating the unconscious of Indian constitutional law using a psychoanalytic method.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting research area. So, uh, moving on, what do you think? What are the key differences when it comes to the academic environment between U.S. law schools and Indian law schools?
I think as key differences, 2 points that come to mind immediately are one, that the predominant model, at least one model which has taken up over the last few decades and which has become more progressive, is the 5-year model of law school education as opposed to a 3-year model. In contrast to a Juris Doctorate degree in the US, where people need to have a degree before entering into the law school. So your entry requirements itself requires you to have a preliminary degree, either in political science or whatever, and then you enter the law school, which gives a certain advanced age group that enter the law school. So as opposed to just high school students who learn the intricacies of law right out of high school, there is already some exposure, if we can call it that, in various disciplines, which give a vast interdisciplinary role to a classroom as such. People come from political science. There are many students who come from marketing and business who already completed a 3 or a 4-year degree and then enter the law school. A second key difference would be is that in many law schools or many Indian students that I've interacted with, to read prior hand before the classes is not a common affair. Many law schools still unfortunately follow a textbook model where you have a guidebook or a textbook where the classes go on, but for your examination purposes, you read a text or you read a guide and then enter an exam. It's a very doctrinal, but still a rote learning method which is followed. In contrast, at least in my experience of US law schools, and from what I gather, UK law schools as well, is that reading critical texts prior to the classroom is a major component. Jindal does follow that method where you read prior to the classroom and then you enter the classroom. In one way, it helps because you already have a background information based on which you can have comments in the classroom, as opposed to getting information fused into your mind and then just repeating it and learning it in a rote fashion.
So, how and when did you decide to pursue LLM in comparative law from Cardozo School of Law rather than and following uh, following that JSD from university based in USA instead of going through like other jurisdictions like UK or any other.
So from the beginning, I think after the end of my first year of law school, especially after my criminal law course in Jindal, I was keen towards teaching the law, which was a big shift because I joined BBA LLB with the hope of taking up company law. But as we know, life throws its own hurdles and we never stick to what we plan to do. So at the end of the first year, academics and teaching became something which I was quite passionate of. And towards the fourth year onwards, through some faculty who used to teach psychoanalysis in the law school, that is a subject that was something which I became very interested in. I started reading about it, and as a subject that it seemed quite a radical method to read the law. As opposed to rankings or as opposed to looking at colleges based on reputation alone, I wanted to look at universities and colleges which have an intellectual history in the particular field that I'm interested in. So clearly Oxbridge and other Ivy Leagues, while they are good in their own ways, are more doctrinal focus. When it comes to, as opposed to looking at critical legal studies as a crucial way to think about the law. The famous story being that when Harvard Law School wanted to have critical legal studies, there was $1 million endowment to make sure critical legal studies does not enter Harvard Law campus. They wanted a law and economics forum to be in place of critical legal studies. So there seems to be some push to have a critical discourse against the law or of the law. So two places which seemed ideal to pursue a psychoanalytic legal theory is Cardozo and Birkbeck University of London. I wrote, and the strategy that I followed is to write to specific faculty members whose work I had read and whose work had inspired and motivated me. So I wrote to Professor Peter Goodrich, who is my supervisor right now, telling him that I've read his work and I'm quite interested in what he does, and I want to expand it from an Indian jurisdiction. It worked out in a way where we had a phone call after the initial mail I sent. We had a chat about my interests and what I've read. And he said, okay, why don't you come along to Cardozo? And the finance was a big issue because financing oneself right after Jindal would be, if not for a scholarship, might make it quite difficult. But when you write to faculty, and this is something I learned from experience, and when they see that there is genuine interest, they do try to push efforts from their end to make sure students who show genuine interest to come and join there. So thanks to that call and the chat, I was able to go to Cardozo on a scholarship and work. And my JSD dissertation is pretty much an expansion of what I'm doing in my LLM, what I did in my LLM thesis. So that's the trajectory that it took.
What were the drawbacks or advantages that you experienced in transition from a graduate student based in an Indian law school to joining a law school, Cardozo Law School?
Well, I think at least owing to the privilege of being in a law school in the undergraduate program that followed curriculums based on standards which were not just rote learning or not just doctrinal, there wasn't much of a difficulty in adjusting to curriculums of the United States. So many courses that I did take in Jindal Law School had the critical over towards studying the law. I think that helped quite a bit because when I did go to Cardozo and when we did start working on continental legal philosophy, or we started working on Heidegger and Husserl and Levinas and law, these perspectives did seem difficult to grasp at the first, but because I've already been used to a method where you read and write research papers and reflection papers and not just examinations as evaluation patterns, it was not difficult academically to get used to it. One challenge that would arise, especially for an international student, and this is from my colleagues and my friends who wanted to pursue it, is in getting jobs as lawyers or as attorneys in US or New York especially, because a crucial requirement is that you pass the bar. But even if you do pass the bar, there seems to be a preference in law firms towards JD students who pass the bar as opposed to LLM students who pass the bar. Fortunately, because of my field of interest, I did not have to face the bar or job in a particular practicing arena. But this is something that I constantly hear from my own colleagues and professions, that there is a certain preference in competing against JD students and competing against local students when you come from an international background.
So Did you receive any constructive criticism or positive feedback from colleagues, seniors, professors, or family members that played key role in shaping your professional journey?
Well, I think criticism in terms of the course, yes, I think initially there was resistance because corporate law in the market seems to be what is a preferred field to take up after law. But eventually, when I was determined to do, legal academia and to teach, there was a lot of support from some specific faculty who are particularly working in the same genre. So my interest in psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic legal theory is fueled thanks to a course I took on psychoanalysis and law in my final year at JGL, Dr. Professor Amit Bindal, and my interaction with that those faculty like Professor Bindal, Professor Shiv Vishwanathan, helped in thinking about areas in which the research could be carried out further. So even though these critical genres are not looked at predominantly in like in core courses, which is predominantly doctrinal, there are some elective courses which do guide in particular ways and how research can be expanded to more methodological ways of looking at the law. So definitely some faculty were a key influence in the decisions I did take in pursuing research.
Yeah, so what do you think? What are the key skills required to work and excel as an academician, specifically in a university universities based in United States?
Well, the US law school system, in distinction from the UK law school system, is predominantly based on student law reviews, and student law reviews in terms of JD students who work as editors and reviewers for law reviews. Publications in US law reviews seems to be a very important criteria to progress in academics field in the United States. I know this because in UK, at least in colleges that I'm familiar with, Kent Law School, Birkbeck and Birmingham example, they have doctoral candidates too who work as law review editors, whereas in the US, it is predominantly JD candidates that work as law review editors. So be that as it may, one important thing to work in academics is to make sure that what you research on should be constantly on paper, should be constantly in text. The more your work is in text, there is more engagement with it, there is more constructive criticism and constructive development of it. And in one way that you get a reputation to working in a particular field based on what you write. So I think critical importance is to have your work published as much as possible. Of course, that does not mean publication for the sake of publication, but to work to make sure when you have good research to get it out there in print.
Yeah. So I think you have touched upon this point of like about what kind of challenges are faced by foreign trained lawyers in securing work permit or graduate research assistantship after completing LLM or JSD. So, do you have any other point on?
Well, I think one advice, if I can call it that, that I would have for students hoping to work LLM or to work after an LLM in the US is to think about writing the bar and working for the bar right from the very beginning, because at least the New York bar is considered to be quite a difficult bar exam to pass from just after the California bar. So to work to that is the primary goal, because at the end of the LLM, even if you have an LLM, your visa, which would expire, gives you a 3-month grace period through a OPT, right, the optional practical training. But if you want to retain a permit to work and to reside, you need to pass the bar. If working in a practical area is your goal, if it's academics that is a goal, then it is to make sure that your LLM thesis is quite rigorous, quite good. So US universities are interested in funding to make sure that that can be expanded into a JST dissertation, because students wanting to pursue an LLM and want to then do a JSD or a PhD in the law do require funding to carry out that research. So it's very important to make sure that what you do in your LLM is quite rigorous as a thesis writing, or the courses that you take, or the people that you interact with, to make sure that the written work speaks for yourself, that the written work gives, precedes your name. That is quite important.
So I wanted to ask another question, like what. So what is the difference between JSD and PhD, which uh, yeah, I mean, like, is there any difference in structure of this both the programs like PhD or
Well, in the US, predominantly PhDs are known as JST. Structurally, it's this not very different. It's a 3-year course. It's mainly a research degree. It's Juris Scientificae Doctorate, understood as doctorate in the science of law. So there is an element of understanding legal study as a scientific study. So it's in one way, while structure is not very different, methodologically, the implication is that legal study is scientific, or at least that the advanced study of law follows a particular method of scientific inquiry. There is principles, you apply principles and you come out with it. Of course, there is a lot of JST research which do not follow a purely scientific method. I don't think, epistemologically speaking, my research follows a purely scientific method, because it does have an aesthetic component to it. It does have a critical component to it. So it's not scientific per se. There is one course, I think this is Yale, which has a PhD along with a JST. And I think the way that they distinguish it is precisely in the method that they carry out in. But predominantly, law schools in the United States call their PhD programs as JST, as opposed to DPhils or PhDs in the UK or Australia.
yeah, that's it for today. Thank you, Sabarish, for taking out time from your busy schedule. It was good
My
to
pleasure,
hear about
Pranav.
your experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good one.
Yes. Yes.